Howdy, welcome to another episode of Canon Calls. This week, I have the opportunity to talk to a good friend of mine, Brian Phillips. But before we get started, I wanted to point you guys towards our social media pages for Canon Classics. So if you have Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, please go like and follow those pages. We'll have more and more announcements coming soon about some merchandise, updates on our Canon Classics books and worldview guides, and the addition of new authors. So without further ado, meet Brian Phillips. Sweet. All right, welcome to another episode of Canon Calls. This week, we get to interview a good friend of mine, Brian Phillips. He does all the things. He's a pastor. He saves lives now. He's a husband and a parent. Do you do other things? You do more than that, right?
Yeah. I'm also I teach some at Belmont Abbey College outside of Charlotte here, and also am still working with the Searcy Institute for the last 6 years, um, mainly helping out with consulting and training resources. Yep,
Okay. And then so you
lots of things.
you live in North Carolina?
Yes. Yep. We're well, our family lives in a small town called Albemarle, right outside of Charlotte.
Okay. And you are a pastor at Trinity Reformed Church?
Holy Trinity, yeah,
Okay.
Holy Trinity Reformed. Our church started as a mission of Christ Church in Cary, and which was a mission of Christ Church in Moscow, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah, we've been there since 2008, and I've been honored to be the pastor from day one. So I've been there a little over 11 years.
Awesome. And so I want to get into all the cool stuff you're doing, not only at Searcy and other things like that, but how did you get involved? So you just mentioned you're a pastor at Holy Trinity.
Uh-huh.
Searcy is a think tank type place for the classics.
We're a research institute, just trying to produce resources and um, create resources for homeschooling parents, for classical school teachers, for headmasters, just anything we can do to support classical educators.
Awesome. So about that, so with classical school educators, what does a pastor at Holy Trinity have to do with that kind of project?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the two work together perfectly. I see my work in education as an extension of who I am and my calling as a pastor. And if the purpose of classical education is to cultivate wisdom and virtue, then that obviously dovetails nicely with my calling as a pastor
Right.
to to teach the scriptures, to proclaim the truth, and to model living it out and lead others to do the same. And that ends up fitting quite well. The specific topic, the specific content might be different in a classroom. I've taught history, I've taught literature, I've taught Latin, but so the content is different than it would be in the pulpit, but the aim, the purpose is the same. Calling people to Christ, who is our wisdom, who is virtue. Um, so yeah, I think it works well together. I mean, it's kept me busy, sometimes busier than I'd like to be at times, but the work itself definitely works.
Growing up, was the classics already an interest?
Oh, no, not really. I always loved stories because I'm human. But
It's a
I,
good it is a fundamental
yeah, that's
prerequisite.
another detail about me
Yeah.
for the
Okay.
listeners out there. And so I always loved reading. But no, the classics, particularly as far as what I wanted to pursue professionally or anything, that wasn't really on the map. I always wanted to go into emergency medicine. Um, and I mean, from the time I was, a little guy, my plan was go into the military, let them help pay for my for medical school, and
Sure.
wanted to be a combat medic and then come out and do more emergency medicine. So I've always loved the science um, of that as well. But um, I jokingly say God ruined my plans as a teenager. I did not grow up in a um, covenantal Christian home, so I was converted on kind of a Damascus Road type of way. And so when I became a Christian, it wasn't that long after that I began to very clearly detect a call to pastoral ministry or ministry of some kind, and that was confirmed by our pastor and so on. They were praying with me about it, um, and so the plans to go into emergency medicine kind of derailed, and I ended up, education wise, went into college to essentially a Bible college to study scripture and pastoral studies, and then that from there went into seminary, and I've got a couple of seminary degrees, but I ended up in education and working in the classics because when I went into one of the first opportunities I had to serve in pastoral ministry, we had a small Christian school there, and I was kind of thrust very very young into helping out with the school, and so I began to look into what is the best way to actually provide a Christian education, and long story short, it's nothing short of just divine providence. I ended up on the mailing list somehow of Veritas Press. Still don't know how. I mean, this was not a classical school by any means that I was in at the time. And it was sent to me by name. Again, no idea. Never heard of Veritas Press at the time. So I started reading some of the articles, in the big print catalogs they would send out,
Right.
and ran across some things by Doug Wilson and others, and ordered some of their books. The Case for Christian and Classical Education,
Yeah.
Excused Absence, things like that, and that just, man, that threw me down the rabbit hole. That led to all kinds of other reading, and you know the rest is history, I guess. I was offered a job teaching in a classical school sometime after that, a couple years after that, and that brought us back to this area of North Carolina, which is close to where my wife and I both grew up.
Right.
So here we are.
So, did you feel, even at the time, you said you were kind of thrust into the position early on? Did you feel
Mm-hmm.
like, were you someone who thought, I want to be in Christian education? Like, education must be Christian. We have to find a way to integrate these things, or was it kind of just maybe a societal good, like everybody kind
Mm-hmm.
of goes? How was it for you in terms of how you thought
Yeah.
about education in your faith?
At that point, I saw it as a necessity. I mean, I grew up in all through grammar school. I went to a Catholic school. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
And I and I can look back now and see that that was a tremendous benefit, tremendous blessing for me educationally, as far as giving me tools to learn. But becoming a Christian as a teenager gave me enough to look back on, to where I look at public schools with eyes wide open.
Hmm.
I know what it was like then. I'm 41 now. That was in the 90s, early 90s. And I know what it was like then. I mean, I know what I was like then. And so when I became a Christian, I I had very strong convictions that Christian education is a necessity. It's not a luxury. It's a
Hmm.
necessity.
Hmm.
It's a requirement, for Christian parents, really. And I know that's a big statement, but there it is. It's your podcast. Um,
It's November, so we're all about this kind of stuff.
yeah. Oh, okay. That's right. That's right. So, Yeah, I knew that it was something we needed to be involved in. I knew that as a pastor at the time, this was a good thing, a necessary thing for us to be doing.
Mm.
And at the same time, I knew that I did not know what I was getting into. And so,
Right.
um, I mean, but I thought, um, it's better to um, learn on the job and better to fail trying to do the right thing than fail by doing nothing at all.
Right. So your
So
Veritas, it was more of like a classical Damascus Road experience. It was more you were just
it
getting clarity
was.
on like how we should go about doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I went into it, I was looking for resources just to figure out how we should run our school. I was not banking on um, a whole new way of viewing Christian education,
Right.
which is what I ended up with, and I'm still learning that and still growing in that. But yeah, that's what started it all, and now my wife and I were both teaching for years together in the same school. Now we're blessed to be able to homeschool our four kids, and I'm still teaching at a college level now, and teaching with Searcy. But absolutely, it's a necessity, and something that I think is a perfect extension of the church, and something that the church should be more involved in, and pastors should be more involved in. That's one thing I will say about classical education that I really rejoice in, is seeing how many pastors are involved.
Yeah.
Um, there seems to be a growing number, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I mean, any thoughts on that? Like, what do you think as a pastor doing it? Do you think, is there something attractive in terms of, like, is it a schedule thing? Like, what about it is attractive to pastors
Hmm.
to get involved, in something like that?
Well, I don't know if it's a schedule thing. I mean, pastors. I'm speaking in big general terms here,
Of
but
course.
a lot of us have flexible schedules, in that if you're the the pastor of a church, then you do have the luxury of being able to set your schedule in a sense.
Sure.
Now, of course,
I
you're
was
you're
only
also
kidding.
on call.
I didn't mean to,
Oh,
I wasn't like grilling you. I was just,
no, no, but I think that's a good point, and I think pastors sometimes, pastors who might resist being involved in education the problem might be the way that they're viewing their own availability, the
right.
way they're viewing their own schedule. But I think too that you know theology being the queen subject, right?
Right.
Um, if a pastor has been a diligent student in preparing himself for pastoral ministry, then he should have a lot to offer in the other areas as well. I don't want to call
Mm,
them subjects, but in the other arts and the other disciplines, he should have a lot to offer to the church. Capital C. Whether it's through his own congregation or not, but as far as schooling goes, so
totally.
yeah.
It seems like the ultimate exercise in practically, um, putting all things under the reign and rule of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
integration point of like, I think so. I didn't know anything about the classical world. I grew up in public school. If everybody on this podcast can already tell, has told, they knew from episode one. This is a public school kid. But I got to college, and what they did for an associate's was sort of a classical associate's, maybe. We had an
Hmm.
integrated curriculum, so it was basically we had 3 lectures a week on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they gave us we had the reading schedule, and it was all over the map. There was no siloed classes, so we didn't have philosophy at this time, and then history at this time, and
Right.
then literature. Is basically we had a ton of reading all over the map, and then we didn't even really know what the lecture would be on, but it was actually just it was a real, like I was saying, just an exercise in how do you, God was telling the story in real time.
Mm.
Philosophy, literature, history is all moving at the very same time. And do we have the ruts in our mind to think about that kind of thing?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great format. It's a great way to do it. And as I think teaching people how to navigate through that. I mean, what you basically described is learning how to read well and learning how to think.
Right.
And those are um, those are disciplines that as Christians we have to be able to master, and we have to be able to think well. We have to be able to reason. We have to be able to follow an argument, to know ideas and their consequences, to know the flow of an idea of how it gets from one place to the next in a culture and even in our own minds. And um, so yeah, it all fits together. And two, just kind of taking a step back from what I was saying about this work as a pastor. When I look at the kids in our congregation, and we've tried to do several things, and we're coming back to hopefully do more in the coming months for the families in our church, as far as education goes. And when I look at um, all of the little kids in our church, and the adults we're outnumbered. I hope they never, if they learn to organize, we're in trouble. But they're not as strategic in their thinking
Yeah.
yet. So, but when I look at them and I think I'm feeding the moral imagination. I'm helping them learn to read. I'm helping them learn to follow a story. I'm trying to help them cultivate wisdom and virtue and love the Lord their God, with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love their neighbor as themselves. And then it'd be easy for me to think of all the other stuff that I have to do too. But I'm like, what better thing could I be doing, as a pastor than investing myself in those kids and those families. I mean, it's a wonderful thing.
Right. And even just seeing that that's your domain also. I mean, I think I was never explicitly taught church is over here.
Right.
You have youth group, but like school is its own domain. And as far as I knew, like I knew that when I went into science class, it was time to make a stand because creation too.
Right.
But then I could
Right.
go to my AP psychology class and just be like, yeah, anything Freud says. Um,
Right.
and I was never explicitly taught that God had nothing to do with that. But even just as you said, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength. Thinking, what does God think of Freud? And then when I go to literature,
Mm.
what does God think of Fitzgerald's Gatsby? Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that kind of exercise, and even just the assumption that you mentioned, you assume as a pastor, that's also under your domain too. Obviously, maybe not
Yeah.
explicitly. You're not going to open up, Gatsby's, on Sunday, but it's not
Right.
it's not unrelated.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. It may not be the specific appropriate context, but
For-
it's still related.
right.
It falls somewhere under the umbrella.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay, and then that leads us. You ended up at Searcy.
Yeah. I actually, Andrew Kern is the president of the Searcy Institute, and I taught four of the five Kern children at Covenant Classical School for years. And so that's how I met Andrew, and his wife Karen taught on the same faculty with me for years, and so became friends over that time. And then eventually I taught at the school for 9 years, and Andrew asked me to come on and work with him at Searcy, and been here for the last 6+ years, 6.5. Um, and it's been great.
Yeah, it says you're the Searcy Academy. You're headmaster of Searcy Academy, director
Yeah,
director of
we're
consulting. Go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of we're um, my as is typical, in a smaller kind of organization that deals with producing ideas and resources, and kind of like, I mean, like what you guys do at Canon. I mean, the job evolves a bit.
Yep. Yep.
Just kind of changes with necessity, and it changes with ideas, and so now. I'm more kind of directing what I guess we call training resources. So, the webinars that we do, short-term intensive classes we offer, even some year-long classes. But I've also been involved in some writing projects and producing books for homeschooling parents and teachers to use in the classroom. So um, that's it's kind of changed a little bit over time, but yeah, working closely with schools and resources for homeschoolers. Um, Recently, the webinars that we do like a literature webinar once a month and a training webinar once a month, and that's taken a lot of my attention. That's been a lot of fun though. Get to talk about all kinds of stuff.
You just did a
Um,
Dostoevsky one.
yeah, the brothers Karamazov.
Okay.
We're kind of that's a series called 90 Minutes with the Classics, and we're going through. It was inspired by Louise Cowan and Oz Guinness's book Invitation to the Classics,
Okay.
which tragically is out of print now. But basically, giving people an introduction to these great works of literature that um, sometimes people are a little intimidated diving into some of them, and then or there's so many books that we feel like we are supposed to read. We know we're supposed to read them, but don't really know if we want to or
Sure.
how to get started or whatever. So um, we're trying to just make the great works a little bit more accessible, kind of extend a hand to get people started in reading some of these great works. So we've got we did the Brothers Karamazov, and now let's see, we had Romeo and Juliet was last month, and coming up this month, Matt Bianco is doing one on Aristophanes' Clouds.
Okay.
So that should be a lot of fun too.
Now you've done a guide to the Iliad, guide to the
hmm
Odyssey. Uh, you were an editor, I assume, on Tales of Wonder. What?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then you've done something for us,
Right.
Meditations of Marcus
Two.
Aurelius.
Yeah. And
Um,
well, yeah, and another one coming up.
and Dante. All three, right?
Right. Just the Inferno.
Okay, just the Inferno. We were like,
Yeah.
hold your horses. Don't
Right.
think
Right.
you've got purgatory and
Yeah. Yeah. You
uh,
got to earn that.
yeah.
Do
Everybody
you see
reads
what I
the
did there?
Inferno first. Oh, okay. See,
Yeah. You
wow.
get it?
Yep,
Get it?
yep. That's why I
Some of my
think
better work,
I
Jake.
was
Stick
gonna
with me.
I was gonna say I was just about to ask you why is it important for folks to get into classics, but I think so that you can make classics like dad jokes could be
Exactly.
top tier reason, such as earning.
It's high on my list.
Yeah, right. So, so you obviously think those classics are important. I assume that you think they're important beyond just kids in school. Um,
hmm
with those webinars, I mean, how many adults would you say are like the percentage of kids and adults?
Oh man, it's 90% adults.
So you
Easy.
right. So you obviously think that's important. How ought we as Christians to orient ourselves to the classics? Like, how important is it?
Very.
That's
Um, no, I think there's the classics. Of course, you could define them differently, but good stories, good books, uh, give you give you a way of seeing yourself and seeing the world that is normally hard for you to have just on your own. I know C.S. Lewis talked a lot about this in the introduction that he wrote for On the Incarnation by Saint Athanasius. He talks about the importance of reading old books, and I can't quote him directly, but by the way, for anyone listening, if you buy a copy of On the Incarnation, make sure you get the one
with
that has
Lewis.
the introduction by C.S. Lewis, because you're basically getting a free book. It's like a bonus book in there, and it's just fantastic. But
Do you know who published
um,
that one?
uh, I don't.
Okay.
I think it's from the patristic classic set. So it's like Saint Vladimir's seminary or something.
Love that.
I'm not. I'm not. Sorry, butchered that endorsement, didn't I?
So look
But
for St. Vladius.
yeah, I think so. And in there, he talks about we should read old books because when we read old books, it exposes ways of thinking that we did not know we had. So when we read um, uh, the anything from church fathers to classic works of literature, we're reading the way that they thought, and it seems so strange to us and foreign to us because we're products of our culture. As much as Christians, we don't like to admit that we're products of the Enlightenment.
Hmm.
We're products of modernity. We're products of postmodernity, of posthumanism. And we don't, and it's in ways that we don't even realize. Because if we did realize it, we probably would have, hopefully, we would have repented of it, and
Sure.
asked the Lord to change our thinking, change our hearts. Um, but we don't even realize it. We're thinking in ways that we're sometimes unaware of. And so reading these great books, even ones written by non-Christians, can bring up things that we're not aware of. I mean, that's one benefit of them. And there are times that reading it gives you antitypes too,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
it's not just the models of virtue and goodness and truth and beauty. I mean, sometimes it's, wow, I don't want to be that guy.
Cautionary tales.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we need both. I mean, Scripture gives us both, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, they're important, and not just for students. I mean, we never reach a point where we go, yeah, I've got enough wisdom, or I have enough virtue, I'm good. So all the types we can get.
It does seem that human beings remain ultimately always defeated in the perspective game. It is a difficult thing to achieve perspective,
Yeah.
especially on ourselves.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's when it comes to other people's sins, I've got like 2010 vision. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
when it comes to mine, I need binoculars.
Yeah, and I think Lewis said, is it there that he talks about having lived 1,000 lives? What other
Yeah,
opportunity would he have had to live 1,000 lives but through the reading of old books?
yeah, yeah. And it's something like I've become 1,000 men, and yet become
Yes,
remain
yes,
myself.
that's it.
Gives windows to the soul, and yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's
it's very true.
it's interesting too, as we were talking about in terms of whether it's pastors being in classical education or being a student of classical education as a student or an adult. You also find um, how deep the Bible goes in terms of application and where it applies and how it would apply. If I have 2,000 years plus, 6,000 years of history to try to integrate
Hmm.
towards Scripture, the Bible just seems like this endless, vast.
You can never exhaust it. I
Yeah.
mean, you just can't. I mean, I tell tell my students, and I've said it often in different talks, conference talks and things that I mean, classic literature will reward you with um, each return to it.
Yep.
You can a really great book you can come back to again and again, and it'll reward you. You'll learn things and notice things and so on.
We should
Um,
just put a
but
Lewis
but
essay on repeat here. I think maybe we just
yeah,
walk out and
yeah.
let Lewis finish this out.
But scripture, uh, I mean, so much more so,
Right.
right? So I like to think of, and I mean, I hope it's not irreverent to put it this way, but I think that uh, great stories, great books are kind of like echoes of Scripture, in that they give you a window, um, and sometimes a mirror, right? Um, and and sometimes you don't see that reflection or see that image clearly, so you come back to it again and again. But um, but Scripture is always doing that. The stories are just kind of an echo of what Scripture always does.
Right.
Um, you know, and um, and where stories can do it imperfectly and in a cloudy way, still valuable, but in an imperfect and limited way, Scripture does it perfectly,
Right.
um,
And I think James says
and
that explicitly
repeatedly.
in terms of, being looking into the mirror and forgetting who you are.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we are very forgetful people, so we need all the reminders we can get.
It's a tough deal being a human, you know?
It is. Yeah, humans are the worst. We
Yeah,
are.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so how about this? So with Searcy, there's tons of resources. Check them out, whether it's their webinar.
Yeah.
Uh, Highly recommend anything that my friend Brian teaches. That's the last one I'm going to compliment I'm going to give you, but anything he's doing, highly recommend. We mentioned a few of the books you're doing, especially Canon Classics Guide to Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. We're getting ready to kind of help rebrand and relaunch the classics. But what would you say, like outside of secondary material, even though both of us are involved with curating that,
Hmm.
what if somebody just were utterly convicted by this conversation, which I imagine the masses are? What is the first classic you would send somebody to just raw?
Oh,
So
man, that's a tough one because I guess it depends on their background. Have they what have they read and where are they coming from, kind of thing. I mean, give me some help.
what
Paint
if
a
it was
picture.
what if you just found I'll see if this one helps. What if you and I were at a grocery store and we stumbled upon, let's say, a Brian Cole type figure.
Oh man.
So we're talking
Okay.
really lost,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
doesn't know up or down. Um,
In need of a real Damascus Road kind of.
yeah. Where would you, let's just say somebody that, let's just say a general public school person, um,
Yeah.
and it's just like, wow, maybe I should start considering the classics and
Hmm.
integrating that into my Christian discipleship life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I would recommend in that particular case. I don't know if it's considered a classic of literature, but it's definitely for classical educators a classic. I would recommend reading The Abolition of Man.
Okay.
Um, Reading,
By Lewis.
yeah, C.S. Lewis, The Great Divorce.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
recommend that to anyone who will listen.
totally.
And the Dante's Inferno, the whole Divine Comedy, of course, just fantastic. But you got to start in hell, um,
Yeah.
and I mean that's um,
Right.
so. I mean those are wonderful, but um, I think I'm trying to remember who first said it, but I've heard it said that Western philosophy is just a series of astonished encounters with Plato. But then I think you could say the same about the works of Homer, the Iliad and the
Hmm.
Odyssey.
Hmm.
A lot, the canon of Western literature is just kind of a series of astonished encounters with Homer.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that too. So the Iliad and the Odyssey are just fantastic as well. My Western literature class at Belmont Abbey, I like to tie a lot of those hero stories together and then compare them.
Okay.
The Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and then Beowulf.
Nice.
Um,
You're
you
teaching
get to
Beowulf right
Beowulf,
now,
and
right?
yeah, we just finished up this morning in class actually, and seeing that kind of progression of what a hero looks like, and um, but anyway, that's beyond what your question
No,
was.
that's
But those
awesome.
are those are a few I would recommend.
That's awesome. And anybody that eventually gets into the pool will learn. If you go back and read what you were mentioning, even just um, the Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid, and then you come to Dante, it's like a whole reunion of Greek
Hmm.
heroes and
It
non-heroes and
is.
harpies, and you're like, wow, the gang's all back together, but in Italy.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So it
And
it definitely has a flow
and
to
not
it.
everyone's a hero in Dante.
No, no. So perfect. Well, Brian, thank you for taking the time, man. I really appreciate you. Got me out of a snafu here on this side of the world. So
All right. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
you are the host of the Commons podcast, and you will soon have our very own Dr. Gordon Wilson on.
That's the plan.
Perfect.
Yeah,
We'll
I'm
work
looking
that
forward
out.
to that.
Sweet. Well, everybody go check out all of that. Is there anything coming up that you want to point folks to? Are you your magnum opus on the way or anything like that?
Hmm. Well, no, I don't know about that. I will say that you kind of mentioned it in passing. Tales of Wonder,
Yes.
for any listeners out there, and I love what Canon is doing, especially through Cannonball. Um, the kids' books now. My kids love them. It's fantastic stuff. But given who your audience might be, if you've
Totally.
got young children, check out Tales of Wonder. We've got 2 volumes of that available now. It's basically in each one there's 8 of the classic fairy tales, not the redone, watered down Disney-esque version of the fairy tales, the real fairy tales, and then questions for you to ask, to start conversations with as you're reading them to your kids or to your students. Um, and a lot of tie-ins with scripture and how you can see what those fairy tales are doing. So it's a great resource for homeschoolers or anyone with young kids or anyone teaching young kids. So just want
Perfect.
to throw that out there.
Tales of Wonder, and where can they get that?
That go to searcyinstitute.com.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep, or .org, either one, and check them out in our bookstore.
Sweet. All right, Brian. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Jake.
Take care.